On a rainy night, the so-called intestine-ripping demon struck fear into the streets. A 19-year-old girl was found lying lifeless on the roadside, her intestines exposed, coiled around her neck. The sheer brutality of the killer's methods left people in shock. Only a month later, a second victim emerged. This time, the young woman survived, but her life was irreparably destroyed. The killer sought neither money nor sexual gratification, murdering and disemboweling at random, leaving the small town gripped by terror. On the night of August 17, 2004, a shocking murder took place in Jianten Town, Gansu District, Zhangye City, Gansu Province. At around 11 p.m., an elderly shepherd was herding his flock home. As he passed along a dirt road near several single-story houses, he noticed in the dim light what appeared to be a girl lying by the roadside, about 500 meters away from the houses, next to a small grove of trees. At first, the old man didn't think much of it, assuming she was a passerby who had fallen. After all, the mountain road here was rugged, and it wasn't unusual for people to trip and get hurt. Still, he didn't plan to just leave her there. It was late at night, and he thought it pitiful for a young girl to be lying there alone. He hurried over to check on her, calling out to ask if she was all right, even reminding her to be careful when walking at night. But there was no reply. The girl remained completely still. A wave of unease hit him. Perhaps she had fallen badly and couldn't move. If so, she needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. He stepped closer, preparing to help her up, when suddenly he felt his foot sink into something soft and squishy. In the dim light, he thought he saw something like a rope around the girl's neck. A chill ran through him. Could this be a murder scene? Summoning his courage, he pulled out his lighter to get a clearer look. With just one glance, his blood ran cold. That wasn't a rope at all. It was an intestine. Terrified, the old man bolted toward the street to find help. Even when he stumbled and fell, he didn't feel the pain. He just kept shouting. He wanted the people in town to call the police. Something terrible had happened. But in his panic, he couldn't get the words out clearly. Two young men with a bit more courage followed the direction he pointed. When they arrived, both were left speechless in shock. Once one of them snapped out of it, he hurried to call the police. Zhangye officers arrived at the scene quickly, but even the most seasoned detectives and forensic experts were stunned by the sheer brutality and bloodiness before them. Based on information from nearby residents, police learned that the victim's name was Alan, and she lived in one of the single-story houses nearby. The forensic team determined that this intestine-ripping demon was no ordinary criminal. The killer appeared to have some knowledge of human anatomy. The cuts were precise, and the removal of the intestines was done cleanly and efficiently. This was no clumsy accident. It was deliberate. The perpetrator was clearly experienced. There were no eyewitnesses, and hardly any physical evidence left behind. Any potential footprints or fingerprints had already been washed away by the light rain. Strangely, there were no signs that Alan had been robbed or sexually assaulted. For someone to kill with such brutality, without stealing or violating her, raised unsettling questions. Could it be that the killer bore some deep personal grudge against her? Alan had a good relationship with her landlady. When the landlady heard about the murder, she cried in sorrow, saying the young woman's life had been far too bitter. From the landlady, the police learned that Alan was only 19 years old and came from a rural village nearby. Her family was very poor. Her honest, hard-working parents farmed for a living, but their meager income barely covered basic needs. She also had a younger brother who excelled in school. To help pay for her brother's future university expenses, Alan dropped out of high school and took on odd jobs to supplement the family's income. Her brother had just been admitted to a university in Beijing, and to earn more money for his tuition, Alan came to Gansu District in Zhangye City to work as a sales clerk in a shopping mall, renting a room from the landlady. The landlady described Alan as a warm-hearted, sensible young woman. Though short in stature, she was attractive, well-liked by everyone who met her, and kept a clean, simple social life, rarely clashing with others. No one could have imagined that such a good-hearted girl would meet such a violent end. Given this, a revenge killing seemed unlikely. But the town was small, and news of the intestine-ripping demon spread quickly, leaving the local community gripped by fear. The intestine-ripping demon struck again, brazenly committing another crime barely a month after the first murder. In the early hours of September 20th, another tragedy unfolded. On Dong Street in Gansu District, there was a small beef noodle shop run by a woman named Ms. Ming. The shop had been open for only 3 months, but thanks to her skill at making hand-pulled noodles, business was decent. However, due to the shop's less-than-ideal location and its small size, Ms. Ming couldn't afford to hire multiple employees. She employed only one waitress, a 17-year-old girl named Xiaohua. Xiaohua came from a poor family and was from the same village as Ms. Ming, Pingshan Village in Damon Township, Gansu District. Her father suffered from a chronic illness and couldn't do heavy labor. The family's sole income came from her mother's farm work, which was already meager. To make matters worse, Xiaohua had several younger siblings, and the household expenses far outweighed their income. Faced with this hardship, Xiaohua decided to drop out of school to help support the family, pay for her father's medical treatment, and keep her siblings in school. In early September, through a friend's introduction, Xiaohua began working at Ms. Ming's noodle shop. Despite her young age, she was mature beyond her years, hardworking, and never complained. In less than 20 days, she had already earned high praise from Ms. Ming. That night, Ms. Ming and Xiaohua were cleaning up the tables and dishes, getting ready to close the shop. Suddenly, Xiaohua felt the urgent need to use the restroom and headed to the public toilet outside. She had no idea that what awaited her next would change her life forever. The small public restroom was only a few dozen meters from the noodle shop, just a short walk through a narrow alley. After Xiaohua stepped outside, Ms. Ming continued tidying up the dishes while waiting for her to return. But 5 minutes later, a sudden piercing scream, "Ah!" rang out from outside. Ms. Ming immediately recognized it as Xiaohua's voice. She rushed out of the shop and ran toward the public restroom. On the way, she didn't see Xiaohua anywhere, which made her even more anxious. She began calling out Xiaohua's name loudly. The scream and Ms. Ming's shouts woke nearby residents. Several concerned neighbors rushed out to help her search. A few minutes later, Ms. Ming finally found Xiaohua in front of a residential building behind the noodle shop. Xiaohua had already lost consciousness. Ms. Ming hurried over to help her up, but suddenly felt something slick and slippery near Xiaohua's lower body. Looking down, she saw that Xiaohua's lower half was trailing a mass of intestines. Blood and bodily waste were smeared across the ground. Having never seen anything so horrific, Ms. Ming let out a scream and fainted on the spot. Fortunately, other neighbors were present. They quickly called an ambulance and alerted the police. By the time Ms. Ming regained consciousness, Xiaohua had already been taken to Zhangye People's Hospital. At the hospital, Director Liu examined her and found her injuries to be extremely severe. Her greater omentum, the apron-like fold of tissue that hangs from the stomach over the intestines, along with the entire small intestine, had prolapsed from her lower body. Her small intestine had been torn into 5 or 6 sections, with more than 2 meters of it completely severed and necrotic, leaving less than 1 meter intact. In addition to the massive intestinal damage, the intestine-ripping demon had forcibly inserted a hand into her lower body, causing extensive trauma and multiple tears. The surgery lasted several hours before the medical team finally pulled Xiaohua back from the brink of death. Her life was saved, but Director Liu remained deeply concerned. 2/3 of Xiaohua's small intestine had been removed. The small intestine is the body's primary organ for digesting and absorbing nutrients. With so much of it gone, her quality of life would be severely impacted. After eating, she would quickly need to relieve herself, and she would have to consume liquid meals 7 or 8 times a day just to absorb enough nutrients to survive. What's more, Xiaohua was only 17 years old and had sustained such devastating injuries that she had essentially lost the ability to work for the rest of her life. She might struggle to care for herself, let alone contribute to her family's income. Her reproductive system was also severely damaged, making it unlikely she could ever marry or have children in the future. Even Director Liu, accustomed to witnessing life and death situations, couldn't help but feel sympathy for this young girl. When Xiaohua's mother learned of her daughter's critical injuries, she rushed to the hospital. A simple, honest farmer's wife, she had never imagined such a calamity could befall her child. Her family was already desperately poor, and the 40,000 yuan required for surgery and medical expenses became an unbearable burden on her shoulders. Fortunately, many kind-hearted people stepped forward to help. Numerous doctors and nurses donated money, and after discussion, the hospital decided to waive all of Xiaohua's treatment costs. Generous citizens from Zhangye and even overseas Chinese communities contributed donations. By the time Xiaohua was discharged a month later, her family had received more than 100,000 yuan in donations to support her recovery and living expenses. Yet in just 1 month, such a brutal and vicious crime had struck again, leaving Zhangye's residents deeply shaken. People were so frightened that many refused to go out, not just at night, but even in broad daylight. Businesses suffered as merchants fled, dealing a devastating blow to a town that was only just beginning to develop. The negative impact was enormous, and the pressure on the Zhangye police was immense. The case drew the close attention of both the Gansu Provincial Public Security Department and the Ministry of Public Security. Upon learning of the incident through the news, a vice minister of the Ministry of Public Security issued an urgent directive. The case must be solved quickly, and the killer brought to justice. A special task force was immediately formed. To solve the case quickly and calm public outrage, detectives from the Special Task Force visited Xiaohua after she regained consciousness, hoping to learn what had happened that night. As she recalled the terrifying events, Xiaohua was still trembling uncontrollably. She told them that on the night of the attack, as she left the noodle shop to go to the public restroom, someone suddenly grabbed her by the neck with both an arm and a rope. Because it was dark, she could only make out the attacker's silhouette, but she sensed that it was an adult man. At first, she thought the man had mistaken her for a ghost in the darkness. Panicked, she begged him to let her go, insisting she was not a ghost. But the man said nothing and did not loosen his grip. He just kept choking her tightly. Within moments, Xiaohua began to lose consciousness from lack of oxygen. In a daze, she felt the man dragging her for what seemed like several dozen meters. Suddenly, she was struck by an excruciating tearing pain in her lower body. She let out a scream of agony, and then blacked out completely. The next time she woke up, she was in the hospital. Although the information Xiaohua could provide was limited, the distinctive intestine removal method made it clear that the man who attacked her was the same intestine-ripping demon who had killed Alan. Yet in both Alan's and Xiaohua's cases, neither victim had been sexually assaulted, and the crime scenes themselves were not conducive to such an assault. Clearly, the attacker was not motivated by sexual gratification. Both victims were young and had simple social connections, ruling out possibilities of crimes of passion or revenge. The police concluded that pursuing a motive based on personal relationships would lead nowhere. Instead, they reasoned, the act of inserting a hand into a woman's lower body to pull out her intestines pointed to a deeply perverse psychology. Someone with a pathological hatred toward women. They immediately began reviewing past cases, hoping to find a clue. One case involving harassment of a woman caught their attention. Just 1 month before the attacks on Alan and Xiaohua, in July, Zhangye had seen another assault on a woman. On the night of July 24th, Zhangye police received a report that near a barbecue restaurant by the Grain Trade Building in Gansu district, a woman surnamed Chow had been attacked. That night, Ms. Chow had finished a late shift at work and arranged to meet her husband at the barbecue place for a midnight snack. After waiting in the restaurant for more than 10 minutes, her husband still hadn't arrived, so she stepped outside to call him. While talking on the phone, she unknowingly wandered toward the mouth of a nearby alley. Suddenly, a man appeared, clamped his arm around her neck, and shoved her to the ground. He then asked her if she was Xiao He. Frightened, Ms. Chow screamed. Her husband, who happened to be only a few hundred meters away, heard her cries and ran toward her. The man then fled the scene. Ms. Chow and her husband gave chase for a short distance but soon ran out of stamina. In the end, they couldn't catch the man. Because it was dark, they hadn't gotten a clear look at his face, only that he was tall and well-built, spoke with a local accent, and reeked of alcohol as if he'd been drinking heavily. They reported the incident to the police, gave their statements at the station, and then went home. When that lead went cold, investigators reviewed the case files again and uncovered yet another similar incident. This one also involved the attacker choking the victim, and it even seemed to have some connection to the intestine removal assaults. Just 3 days before Alan's murder, on the night of August 15, 2004, at around 10 p.m., police in Gansu district received a report from a Shenmyo street. A woman named Ms. Pang told officers she had just been beaten and nearly raped. She had been watching a movie alone at home when there was a knock on the door. Upon opening it, she found a tall man standing outside. The man said he was looking for someone named Zhang Wenbing, but Ms. Pang had never heard of him. Without warning, the man forced his way inside and searched the rooms. Finding no one, he told Ms. Peng he wanted to have sex with her and offered her 200 yuan. Believing the man was drunk and acting crazy, Ms. Peng shouted for her landlord next door. Enraged, the man grabbed her by the throat, shoved her to the ground, and punched her several times. Ms. Peng screamed even louder for help and fought back against him. When he realized he couldn't overpower her, he suddenly reached down and grabbed her genitals before fleeing out the door. Moments later, the landlord's family arrived and called the police. Investigators suspected that all these similar incidents were the work of the same man. In Ms. Peng's case, she had actually spoken with the attacker, remembered his face, and recognized his local accent, providing a crucial breakthrough in the investigation. Based on her description, the police produced a composite sketch. When one of the task force officers saw the sketch, he was stunned. It was a familiar face. Qiao Jiangwo. Qiao Jiangwo was far from an upstanding citizen. His record was riddled with misconduct. He was born on November 5, 1970, in Gansu District, Zhangye City, into a working-class family. Both of his parents were employees at a construction company. He was the youngest of 5 children, with 3 older sisters and 1 older brother. As the baby of the family, Qiao was doted on by both his parents and siblings. From an early age, however, he had a bad temper, was lazy, and avoided work. He did poorly in school, and despite frequent beatings from his father, his behavior never improved. According to his family, Qiao's downward spiral worsened after a failed romantic relationship. At the time, he had fallen in love with a young woman, but her family refused to let her continue seeing him, citing his family's poor financial situation. This rejection hit Qiao hard. He became despondent, gave up on himself, and turned to heavy drinking. When drunk, he often went out looking for trouble, starting fights and brawling in public. Physically, Qiao was well-built, 1.82 meters tall, with thick, powerful limbs. This natural advantage meant most petty thugs were no match for him. Using his physical strength to his benefit, he began to gain a certain reputation and gradually fell in with the local gang crowd. His older brother, Qiao Jianmen, was much the same, and the two often roamed around together causing trouble. Before Qiao Jiangwo even turned 18, he was involved in a gang theft case. In 1989, he was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. While incarcerated, Qiao displayed good behavior and received a 1-year sentence reduction, leading to his early release in 1994. But with the stigma of being a former inmate, he found it impossible to secure stable employment. He scraped by doing odd jobs from time to time, supplementing his living expenses with his parents' pensions. Frustrated and idle, he sank deeper into alcoholism, spending most of his days drunk. Eventually, he even became involved with illicit substances, and dragged his older brother Qiao Jianmen into using them as well. When Qiao Jiangwo's family learned that both he and his brother were using illegal substances, they were deeply disappointed. Especially his father. Convinced that his son was beyond saving, his father decided to give up on him entirely, letting him live or die on his own without any further concern. For the next 10 years, until Qiao Jiangwo's final arrest, father and son barely exchanged a word. Seeing that his family no longer cared about him, Qiao gave up on himself completely, indulging in his addiction without restraint. He was twice sent to compulsory rehabilitation for drug use. His last sentence to re-education through labor was on May 17, 2001. 3 years later, on March 14, 2004, he was released 2 months early and returned home. By that point, at the age of 34, Qiao Jiangwo had already been imprisoned or in labor camps 3 separate times, spending a total of 10 years behind bars. He also had a history of assaulting women. 3 months before Alan's murder, in April, a masseuse named Xiao He, who worked at a hair-washing salon, called the police claiming a customer had beaten her and stolen her phone. When officers arrived, they found only some minor abrasions on her body. Strangely, Xiao He told them that after the man took her phone, he later returned to the shop and gave it back. That customer was none other than Qiao Jiangwo. Qiao told police that he and Xiao He had gotten into a mutual fight. That night, he had gone to her shop for a hair wash. Afterward, Xiao He asked if he wanted any other services. Assuming she was a sex worker, Qiao made a few mocking remarks. Xiao He felt insulted and immediately cursed him out. The argument escalated, and in a fit of anger, they came to blows. Xiao He scratched Qiao several times, and Qiao, unable to control his temper, shoved her hard to the ground before storming off. Before leaving, he grabbed her phone, intending to teach her a lesson. But after walking out, he reconsidered. He had only been out of the labor camp for a month, and it wasn't worth risking prison time over a phone. So he returned to the shop, threw the phone back to her, and told her not to call the police. But he called the police anyway. The attacks on Ms. Chow and he both indicated that Chow Jang-wo harbored a certain hostility toward women. Coupled with his prior criminal record, police determined he was a prime suspect. Investigators visited residents near the scene of Xiaohua's attack, showing them Chow Jang-wo's photograph. Witnesses stated that his appearance closely resembled that of the attacker. Police then showed Xiaohua more than 20 photos to identify potential suspects. She picked out 2 individuals who could be the intestine-ripping demon, one of whom was Chow Jang-wo. Chow not only had a strong resemblance to the suspect but also had the opportunity to commit the crimes. During the 8.12 case in which Alan was murdered, Chow was in Zhongye. After the killing, he suddenly left for Beijing, seemingly to lay low. On September 2nd, he returned, right when police were conducting a blanket investigation of the area. After staying home for just 3 days, he quickly went back to Beijing, again appearing to avoid police attention. 10 days later, he returned to Zhongye, and soon after, Xiaohua's attack occurred. His movements were highly suspicious. The police decided to arrest him immediately. More than 20 plainclothes officers set up 5 surveillance points nearby, prepared to apprehend him the moment he stepped outside. But Chow Jang-wo was no ordinary target. With 3 prison terms behind him, he was well aware of police tactics. He quickly realized he was being watched. Together with his brother, Chow Jianmin, he locked the door from inside and refused to leave, choosing to wait the police out. The Chow family's home had a reinforced security door that could only be forced open with a crowbar. Inside were kitchen knives and other potential weapons. A forced entry could have resulted in casualties. After discussion, the task force decided to lure him out instead. Knowing both brothers were addicted to illegal substances, they planned to use a drug test as a pretext to get Chow downstairs. But Chow refused to open the door, threatening that if cornered, he would take others down with him, and if the police used force, he would jump from the building. The standoff dragged on for 9 days with no progress, until police contacted Chow's girlfriend and mother to persuade him to surrender. The task force leader promised that his mother and girlfriend would accompany him to the drug test. After 9 days and nights, Chow finally agreed to go for the test, allowing police to arrest him without incident. Once in custody, Chow admitted to assaulting Ms. Chow and Ms. Peng, but claimed both incidents were nothing more than drunken harassment of women, denying any involvement in murder. When questioned about the attacks on Alan and Xiaohua, he firmly denied responsibility. But detectives exploited inconsistencies in his statements, pressing him relentlessly until his psychological defenses collapsed. He confessed. Zhongye police publicly announced the case had been solved. The intestine-ripping demon was Chow Jang-wo. Chow stated that he killed Alan because she stood him up for a date. On August 11th, while wandering around Gansu district, Chow encountered Alan, who was waiting for a friend. Seeing she was alone, he struck up a conversation and began telling her his life story. Alan showed him sympathy, which emboldened him to demand she meet him the following day. Alan refused. The next day, August 12th, when he didn't see her, Chow became furious. After heavy drinking, he went out searching for her. By chance, he ran into Alan, insulted her, and forced his way into her rental room. Around 10 p.m., Chow dragged her from the house into a nearby grove along the dirt road, ignoring the torrential rain. There, he strangled her to death. Not satisfied with killing her, he mutilated the corpse by removing her intestines, then returned home. As for the disembowelment of Xiaohua, Chow Jang-wo claimed it was a case of mistaken identity during an act of revenge. On the night of September 19th, after heavily drinking with friends at a bar in Gansu district, Chow was on his way home when he passed a beef noodle shop on Dong Street. There, he encountered Xiaohua, who had stepped outside to use the restroom. In his drunken state, Chow thought her silhouette looked very similar to Xiaohe's, and he immediately developed the intent to kill her in revenge. But when Xiaohua cried out in a local accent, Chow realized he had the wrong person. Xiaohe was not from the area. Fearing that Xiaohua might call the police, Chow panicked. He strangled her until she lost consciousness, then dragged her from beside the restroom to the entrance of a nearby building, where he brutally disemboweled her. Frightened off by Ms. Ming's scream, he fled the scene quickly and returned home to sleep. Initially, everything seemed settled. But during the trial, Chow suddenly recanted his confession. At 9 a.m. on January 6, 2005, the court hearing officially began. Chow was arrogant throughout, keeping his head held high. He admitted only to the 3 incidents of harassing women, but in court, he retracted his earlier confession to killing Alan and mutilating Xiaohua, denying both crimes. He claimed that his earlier admission was the result of police pressure during the standoff and that there was no concrete evidence proving he committed the murders, arguing that a confession alone was not enough to convict him. Due to insufficient evidence in Chow's appeal, the Zhangye Intermediate People's Court held 2 separate trials for the case. Both times, the court sentenced him to death. In the third review, the court ultimately decided to overturn the sentencing portion of the first trial's verdict for the charge of intentional homicide, while upholding all other parts of the original judgment. The legal proceedings against Chow Jiangwo have concluded, but whether he was truly the intestine-ripping demon remains a matter of serious doubt. Chow's defense attorney raised several questions. Logically, in 2 murder cases, there should be at least some direct physical evidence. The lack of evidence in the first case could be explained by the rain washing away fingerprints, footprints, and bloodstains. But the second crime scene had been well preserved. The killing was a crime of passion, meaning the perpetrator would have had no time to calmly put on gloves. In theory, it was impossible for there to be no forensic evidence left behind. Yet ultimately, the prosecution had only Chow's confession and witness testimony, which led to the conclusion that the evidence was insufficient. Even Ms. Ming, the noodle shop owner, believed the killer might not have acted alone. She recalled that after Xiaohua left the shop, less than 5 minutes later she heard the girls scream. She immediately ran out to search for her. At that moment, she noticed 3 young men standing by the roadside nearby, watching furtively in her direction, their behavior highly suspicious. When they heard Ms. Ming calling out, one of them coughed loudly several times, as if signaling to someone. But when she returned from the restroom area to the noodle shop, the 3 men were gone. At the time, she was too frightened and focused on helping Xiaohua to think much of it. Only afterward did she realize how suspicious they seemed, wondering whether they had any connection to the intestine-ripping demon. Dr. Liu, the hospital director, also pointed out something troubling. Xiaohua's small intestine had been pulled directly out of her lower body by hand. No sharp instrument had been used, as such tools could not have caused so many simultaneous injuries. But given that the entire attack took place in under 10 minutes, it would be extremely difficult for an average person to accomplish. Even a highly skilled surgeon would find it nearly impossible to locate and extract the small intestine through the lower body in that amount of time. This suggested the killer might have had advanced technical knowledge. The precision of the attack, swift, accurate, and brutal, made Dr. Liu doubt that Chow, who had neither medical training nor experience slaughtering animals, could have performed it. Chow's girlfriend also didn't believe he was capable of such a crime. She argued that although he had a criminal history, he had stopped using illegal substances since meeting her. They were preparing to get married, and he was in the process of opening his own noodle shop. It was hard to imagine that a man on the verge of starting a new life would kill over a missed meeting or mistaken identity. Even if he were to kill, why would he go so far as to disembowel the victim instead of simply strangling her? In Xiaohua's case, Chow and the masseuse Xiao he had no deep enmity, only a minor scuffle. That hardly justified murder. And once Chow realized, from Xiaohua's scream, that she was the wrong person, why wouldn't he have stopped? If his goal was to silence her, she hadn't even seen his face clearly in the dark, making the mutilation completely unnecessary. Chow's family also questioned the narrative. If he truly had committed the crimes, why would he willingly come downstairs to surrender, knowing full well it would lead to his execution? An even more puzzling development came when Chow's older brother, Chow Jianmin, suddenly took his own life. On December 8, at 11:40 a.m., after Chow's first trial ended with a death sentence, Jianmin jumped from the 7th floor of his residence. The reason for his suicide remains unknown. The intestine-ripping demon targeted young girls, yet the women Chow had attacked in previous incidents were all older. Had his victim profile suddenly changed, or was he, in fact, wrongfully accused? What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this case, don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow Case Diaries. There are plenty more cases coming your way. Got thoughts on today's story? Drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. See you in the next one.